At some point in the future, perhaps the not too distant future, we'll look back at this time and say, we were living in a city that was locked down, in a world where we couldn't see our friends, our colleagues, and our families, fighting a battle against a pandemic. One of my friends warned me about the coronavirus in January or early February. Like so many in government around the world, I ignored him. But here we are. Turning the tide against the disease, it seems, but at the same time, everything has changed. It's a profound lesson in impermanence. Many of us are experiencing a range of emotions. I know I am. Fear, sadness, grief, anger. I'd like to talk about my experience and how we practice with and respond to what's going on in the world. We can't ignore what's going on around us. When there's fighting across the river, we experience the violence here. We are all affected. The magnitude of the change is staggering. I was reminded last night as I was working on this talk of a quote from Joan Didion. I think it's the opening lines actually of a book that she wrote about the year of her life after her husband passed away. It's called The Year of Magical Thinking. And it goes as follows. She says, life changes fast. Life changes in the instant. You sit down to dinner and life as you know it ends. Some of us have family members or friends who are in the hospital or who have died. Just a few short months ago, the economy was said to be booming. Now restaurants and stores are shuttered, schools are closed, and millions of people are out of work. Many of those people lived from paycheck to paycheck. Now they can't pay their rent. Children are at home. For professionals working from home, this is an inconvenience. For a supermarket clerk or a first responder, it's a choice between being a good parent and keeping your job. Some children, those who relied on school lunches, may not have enough food. Every day, I read stories and I look at data, some days obsessively. We read about the emergency room nurse who is tired from working too many hours, who has colleagues who have fallen ill. We read about the postal worker or the delivery person, glad to have a job, but unsure of the risks they're taking. There have been other pandemics. The Black Plague, the bubonic plague, killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people, 60% of Europe's population in the 14th century. It struck Italy again in 1630 to 1633, and in 1656 and 1657. And it struck London in 1665. In 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic killed something on the order of 50 million people, about 675,000 people in the United States. A little over 10 years ago, over 60 million people contracted swine flu. I hardly remember this. Nearly 13,000 people died. If the data is accurate, something on the order of 135 people have died from coronavirus, almost 12,000 in New York State. During the plague in Italy, a Florentine chronicler wrote, all of the citizens did little else except to carry dead bodies to be buried. At every church, they dug deep pits down to the water table, and thus those who were poor, who died during the night, were bundled up quickly and thrown into the pit. In the morning, when a large number of bodies were found in the pit, they took some earth and shoveled it on top of them. And later, others were placed on top of them, and then another layer of earth, just as one makes lasagna with layers of pasta and cheese. In New York City, we read about the morgues set up in refrigerator trucks outside hospitals. Or in a nursing home, we read about bodies stacked in an empty room. At the most basic level, I think we need to acknowledge that we are all afraid of dying. We take precautions, but we can't deny, as we usually do, that our fate is unpredictable. Sickness and death could be there for ourselves or for a loved one at any moment. So I think we have to recognize that at some level, many of us are afraid and are grieving. What any one of us has lost individually might be trivial or it might be earth-shattering. But even when it's trivial for us individually, what does my hair look like? Why can't I buy the brand of yogurt I want to at the store? We all know how much has changed. We know what has been lost for so many, lives and livelihoods that may never be regained. And we're grieving. So I think first and foremost, we have to have compassion for ourselves and for those around us. We need to recognize that the process of coping with grief and with change is not linear. For much of my day, I go about my day much as I usually do, from home, of course. But at a random moment, maybe in the middle of the night, when I get up to go to the bathroom, I'll stop and look around and think, this could all be gone overnight. Or I'll step outside. I'll feel the warmth of the sun. I'll look at the trees, the sky, just soak in the beauty of the spring day. Like a cat curled in the sun on a chilly day, because the sun is warm, and to smell the air, to see the sky, is life for a cat and for a human. For those of us who are at home with time on our hands, we are fortunate that we have time to contemplate. What the media calls quarantine, we Buddhists call retreat. We can allow ourselves to make something of this experience. We can find ways of processing it, and we can find ways to serve. I now have time to go for a walk in the afternoon. Neighbors are out with their children. Families walking or riding bicycles together. I haven't seen families walking together in the afternoon in the 30 years we've lived in New Jersey. When did families stop walking together? They're doing it now. Some of them say hello, not all of them. Some of them are talking on their phones. But they aren't rushing around trying to get somewhere else. One of the side effects of being on retreat, even in quarantine, even in isolation, is that we can serve. The Bodhisattva ideal is to find within ourselves the compassion and the wisdom to alleviate suffering and practice good in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. We see bodhisattvas all around us. The mail carrier delivering a package to us on Sunday. The National Guardsman handing out lunch to children who aren't getting school lunch. The defense lawyer fighting to get people released from jails. The food pantry director maintaining food distribution to people who don't have enough. People cheering in New York City in solidarity with the first responders, creating a sense of community in their isolation. People making masks. People on nextdoor.com offering to bring food to people who cannot go shopping. The doctors and the nurses. I'll read this quote from Dr. Michael Jones, who runs the Physician's Residence Program at 2 hospitals here in New York City. He says, "Take a few moments, if you can, to talk about patients' families, their lives, and their dreams." This is counseling the residents talking to patients. Ask if there is a loved one you can call. And lastly, 2 very different things. Hold your patient's hand for a minute as they near death or pass, and ask your entire team to stop for 5 or 10 seconds, bow your heads, state the patient's name, and ask for silence. This helps us retain our humanity in times of such crisis and give our patients' families some solace that they were treated with dignity. For some of us sitting at home who are not doctors and nurses, maybe what we can do is simply follow the rules. Stay at home, practice social distancing. I've talked to so many people who are having a hard time with this, but they know they have to do it to protect not just themselves, but to protect others. Reach out to those people, your friends or your family, people who are alone in an apartment. If there's nothing else we can do, we can bear witness. The koan I wanted to work with or share today was one that, as I was looking through my koan collections, just leaped out at me. It's Kyogen's Man Up a Tree. Master Kyogen said, "It's like a man up a tree who hangs from a branch by his mouth. His hands cannot grasp a bough, his feet cannot touch the tree. Another man comes under the tree and asks him the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West. If he does not answer, he does not meet the questioner's need. If he answers, he will lose his life. At such a time, how should he answer?" So I like this image of a man hanging from a branch by his mouth. He's in a difficult place that he can't escape. It seems to fit. And of course, as many of us know, asking the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West is the same as asking what is the meaning of Zen, or why do we practice? Is it just for ourselves, to calm our minds? Sometimes. But if it's just for ourselves, then when we are asked for help, we sit there trying to maintain our composure. We don't meet the questioner's need. That's not what the mail delivery person is doing. That's not what the doctors and nurses are doing. We can make something of this experience. I've found that I'm making time to read. I used to love to read, but when is there time to read something just for enjoyment? Now, ironically, of course, the thing that I picked up to read was a novel that was written in 1942 by Albert Camus called The Plague. Many of us read it in high school. I started reading it again this week. It's a literary work. It's not journalism, so it doesn't have the immediacy of the New York Times accounts about what's going on today. But Camus was writing about the existential crisis that underlies all of our experience at this time. The plague starts in a nondescript town on the Algerian coast called Oran. It has a smug, placid air. Its citizens, he says, work hard, but solely with the objective of getting rich. Their chief interest is in commerce, and their chief aim in life, as they call it, is doing business. Then one day, one of the characters, one of the protagonists in the plague, a doctor named Ryo, finds a dead rat in the hallway of his apartment building. Then another, then another. And these rats are carrying the plague. Before long, a quarter of the town is dead. But the people of the town are in denial. They continue to pretend that the world is unchanged. This is going on today. Our townsfolk were not more to blame than others, but they forgot to be modest. That was all, and thought that everything still was possible for them, which presupposed that pestilences were impossible. They went on doing business, arranged for journeys, and formed views. At one point, a little later on, after an extended reverie in which Ryo dreams about carts laden with dead bodies, about victims piled up in Chinese towns, silent in their agony, about charnel houses in London reeking to high heaven and deserted even by birds, Camus writes, Ryo pulled himself together. There lay certitude, there in his daily rounds. All the rest hung on mere threads and trivial contingencies. You couldn't waste your time on it. The thing to do was to do your job as it should be done. Later he says, it may seem a ridiculous idea, but the only way to fight the plague is with decency. And when asked what decency is, Ryo says, doing my job. So in Camus' existential philosophy of the absurd, fate is arbitrary and capricious. Our human bodies are frail, and being alive is always an emergency, as one reviewer says. But rather than being a cause of despair, this situation should lead us to a kind of redemption, to an opening of our hearts, and to a commitment to work diligently with whatever energy we have to lessen the suffering we find in the world. Camus' writing about the Bodhisattva ideal. But what can we do? Stay home. Wash our hands. Sometimes our role is simply to bear witness. Sometimes we can do more. So make a mask if you can sew. Sing, "Hey Jude," at the top of your lungs. Laugh with the child. Comfort a friend who is struggling. Take out the garbage. Do the dishes. Help clean up the apartment. Sign petitions. Donate money. Sleep late. Get up early. Thank the delivery person if you see them. And remember to be gentle with yourself and with the people you're in quarantine with.